I'm Addison Brasil. Grief Club, the podcast starts now. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Grief Club, the podcast. Today we have a very special episode where we are bringing back one of our most listened to guests, Rachel Kaplan. Welcome back to the show.
Wow, most listened to.
Yeah, seriously. It turns out that if you tell people how to live with their emotions and also make me deal with the uncomfortableness of talking about poop, that's what the audience was looking for this whole time. I should have
That's so great.
just started with that. No, but really, I think it resonated a lot with a lot of people, and we were a great example of getting into it, but also finding the funny, but making sure the work got done. And I think like that's kind of the whole vibe and spirit of the show.
Yeah.
So
well, that's why we keep vibing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we have you back today. I realize that some people coming at this point will not have listened to that episode. So I do encourage everybody to go back and listen to that episode on anger and feelings. I'll put it in the show notes. But for those of us who are just joining us today, maybe just a few sentences about who Rachel is and how she shows up in the world.
From Rachel herself.
From Rachel herself.
Hi, guys. Really to connect to all of you. I am a 43-year-old licensed psychotherapist out in California. And, in addition to all the normal wounding everyone has from just being a human raised by humans, my first love took his own life when we were both 14. Really grueling story there, which is in my podcast if you want some help crying. And if you like listening to teenage sad stories. But it pretty much sent me on a lifelong journey to heal myself and eventually to become a catalyst and companion for healing. That brought me over to Eastern practices, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, through the traditional, if you can call it traditional, because I went to a kind of cool integrative East meets West type school, but the traditional Western psychotherapeutic approach focusing on trauma modalities. And the last like 4 or 5 years, I've been really using the poop metaphor, as Addison loves, to help people understand the single most important step, I think, and the most crucial step to healing ourselves, which is really having a functioning emotional system. And so I've been doing that through a podcast and through short form education. I have a membership. I call it the Feelings Movement. You can go to thefeelingsmovement.com to learn about all that stuff. But I'm really using my life to help people heal because that's what's fun for me. And that's what I'm here for, apparently.
That's what you're here for. And we are glad that you are. All right. Before we get into the meat of this episode, talking about thoughts and feelings, let's check in. Let's take a deep breath. And in one word, how are you feeling physically right now?
Well, what's interesting is my face feels different than my body. So I'm curious about that. My face feels kind of tense and my body feels pretty energetic and alive.
I'm going to say jittery. In one word, how are you feeling emotionally right now?
And now I have to use one of the words that I only use 4 feeling words. So I'm going to go outside my own box and say overwhelmed. I'm an escrow, y'all.
I'm an escrow, y'all. My word, we are terrible at saying one word only. But
we're using like under 5.
One word. And the sound that goes behind this is only 30 seconds long. So we're going to go over that today. But I feel like whatever the word is for like, I feel emotionally like what you're feeling. Like, I feel like I know your circumstances right now. Empathetic? Feel empathetic? We're going to get into that today because I think that's a thought, not a feeling. But hey, I don't
know. One thing about that is, most people say empathetic. I say empathic. I think they both work, but it's so interesting. But anyway, that's not the subject of this.
And in one word, how are you feeling mentally? I'm going to start with distracted.
Was that for you or for me?
For me.
Mentally, oh my God. I'm going to go with escrow.
Escrow.
No, I'm excited. I'm, when I listen to myself say my bio, I'm like, that is surprisingly succinct and effective for how much I'm juggling in my brain and in my life right now. So I'm here for this. I'm excited. Oh, wait, that's not really a mental state. I'm focused. Let's do this.
Okay. Okay. I think now we've gone from one of the most listened to guests to one of the longest check-ins. You're just like hitting the world records of Grief Club each time.
Yeah.
Um, all right, let's get right to it. Explain, I was going to call this episode a griever, a meditation coach, and a psychotherapist walk into a bar. Because I have clips from each of us, like kind of riffing on thoughts versus feelings.
Oh, nice.
Um, and so we'll end this episode with a little preview of next week's guest and his thoughts on this. But right now, from your point of view, I would just love how you'd explain this to begin with, like with thoughts versus feelings.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that they're two different things. And as far as what thought, like you want definitions here, right? So
Yeah.
let me start with emotions, because that's really what I'm honing in on. I favor emotions at this point in life. I didn't always, actually, but what I like to call emotions are intense clusters of sensations rolling in squads through your body. So that's my way of being like, I'm cool, squads, right? But it's like these like waves of sensations, which are they're body-based occurrences. It's like a phenomena that's physical and that you are sensing, and sensing meaning awareness. Okay. So an emotion, at the heart of it is a physical experience. A thought is, words that are consciousness, our awareness, and words and meaning clustered together, right? They're stories. They're, meaning making stories. And, yeah, I think, and there's I think the whole field of people, like there's a lot of nuance in the field of therapy and in the field of mindfulness, and like some people make a really big distinction between emotions and feelings. And when they say feelings, the people who are making that distinction, they're talking about the stories, the thoughts, the meaning that we make out of those sensations. So they really say there's this and there's that. And one is in your body and one is the story you make about your body. When I use the word emotion or feeling, I'm using it interchangeably to talk about the body thing. Okay. The thoughts and meaning, and since, I think you want me to riff on like the difference between them. So I'll get past the definition. I think the thoughts are, they can be very conditioned. Our feelings get conditioned or patterned, but our thoughts 100%, we get into ruts, and our thoughts are like, in theory, you should be able to get to a place, or you could get to a place where you're able to objectively experience sensation and emotion in the body, feelings, if you will, as neutral, as just as if you were observing a cloud floating by. But I think thoughts by their very nature they're conditioned. If like a woman walked into a room, let's say wearing something incredibly, exposing, and she was barely covered, and you have 30 people in the room, every person is going to have a different interpretation, based on their conditioning. Like, were they taught that women should be modest? Are they turned on? Are they jealous? Are they competing? Are they worried? Are they afraid of, and so whatever the story is, that they have is going to be based on conditioning. I'm not sure that thoughts could be objective. We can use the same kind of observation that we use to observe sensation and emotion, to observe what we're thinking, right? But a mindfulness teacher will really encourage you to practice not thinking. And so to come out of that, like, I think that was kind of clumsy. I'm better with words than that normally, but let me get to what I think about it. First of all, I'll just say that after my first love killed himself, I spent the next many years just trying to be a thinker. In fact, I was almost going to go into philosophy. And the reason was that I found that thinking was a safe space from my pain. And we as Westerners, people who are living in this, hyper productive, commercial focused consumerist culture, we're living in a time where thinking is really prioritized. The mind is exalted in our culture. And I think that's starting to shift now around, feelings getting more airtime, more respect. But I think part of why we all like it so much is that if we try to approach things logically or rationally, we can stay in the 6 inches above our body. We can stay up here in this like fascinating, weird muscle and brain and, synapses, and try to avoid the heartache that so often accompanies being a human. And so what I find and what I'm teaching is really saying there is almost no good reason to say why. Like, and I say almost no good reason because there's a little bit of a reason. There are moments in our healing journey or in our grief journey where I would encourage someone to self-reflect in that way, where we're saying why. But why is really like the cardinal question of the mind, right? In some way. Whereas how, you're like, you could be like, how is that happening? And you could just keep observing, right? How, the question of how am I feeling? You're just looking for, how am I feeling? There's not necessarily like a judgment or, and with why, if you notice, if you look at your life, like when do you ask someone why? If someone was like, all right, gotta go to work, would you be like, why? Probably not, because you're like, of course you have to work. Shit's expensive. But we say, if you were like, oh, I'm so mad at such and such, and I'd be like, oh, why? Because there's so inherent in the question why is a should, that we should not feel that way. We only really ask that question when there's like this subtle like judging, right? And so what I notice with people who are trying to think their way to well-being, or think their way through their grief, or think their way through childhood healing, inner child healing, is that it's kind of this constant jumping back into this place where they're trying to avoid pain through the mechanism of, if I can understand it, if I can logic my way through it, it'll be okay. So there's a lot of people out there, a lot of you listeners might relate to this or know someone like this. They've done all the therapy, they do all the self-help, they're woo-woo, they got all the fancy words, and they're still really stuck in their patterning, and they're in a lot of pain. And it's because the stories we have about our childhood, the stories we have about someone's death, or what we did wrong or what we didn't do wrong, have very little to do with how well we feel. And so I'm kind of like a champion for not doing that much thinking. and like, I want to give you a chance if you have a good question for me, because you probably do, but like, well, how would you heal then if you're not thinking, right? Or and
I also want to give like the context that, like, there's that Luskin-Stanford study, like we have 60,000 thoughts a day, and they say 90% of them are repetitive.
Yeah.
Like, so I just know when I heard that, I mean, I feel like I think a lot, but I never would think that I have that many thoughts a day. Like I'm definitely an overthinker, a hyperactive thinker. I'm thinking even when I'm sleeping. Like I never feel rested. I have a very conscious thought process that happens well. It feels like I'm watching Netflix of dreams all night long, but I can hear my thoughts at the same time. It's very Black Mirror, and it's all very born of, I always had intense and vivid dreams as a child, but in these compounded grief processes and the compounded post-traumatic, it definitely got to a place where like basically I can't turn the computer off, it feels like, and I can, obviously there's hours, because I can't track time, where I'm probably relieved of that, but all I can remember is the time in the night where I'm still thinking, and like I can think about the next day. I can start to run through my, like, what I have to do and like all these things. So I really have overthinkeritis, for lack of a real better word for that.
Yeah.
And I know that I probably at this point struggle more with, and I love how you've brought it up twice now, we get told a lot to like not think so much, especially more in that, like you said, the meditation space and the self-help space. But realistically, there's 60,000 of those thoughts a day.
Right.
And then for someone like me, which it really resonated where you said where there's more safety in the thinking than the feeling. And I think that will resonate with a lot of people. But now I've gotten to a point where I'm realizing that there's actually not, and there's a lot of exhaustion in that zone, and burnout, quite frankly, because you can't. I am 34 now, and I am like, we cannot go on this way. We cannot think about every scenario, and like I've done strategy before. I like, there's like, and I'm like a screenwriter, so I'm thinking on many different levels of like, am I catastrophizing? But I'm like, oh, great screenwriting, buddy, stop. Like it's just like always going. Like there's always
Yeah.
strategy. And because I'm someone in people's lives as well, like I feel like I never get to go to just a coffee. People are like, what do you think I should do about this? And then it's like it's a
Mhm.
strategy call. Like, like
Uh-huh.
there's like within that. So I just wanted to say that like, it does really resonate with me. And then when you said you're, at the end there that you're not a fan of thinking it and maybe thinking less, that's where I was like, okay, yeah, give me the goods on that
Well,
then.
first of all, if you were to ask everyone who knows me, I'm also a huge thinker. And just because I don't think it's particularly fruitful in the service of our healing and well-being to try to think our way through things doesn't mean it's not, like you're saying, there's 60,000 of them. And there is a really beautiful place for thinking. Like you and I are both people creating and generating a lot of beautiful content, and it sounds like art, in the
Hmm.
world. And I'm handling so much, and it's because I have this sharp functioning mind. There's a place for the mind. I think the place, that the mind is not really our friend is trying to resolve things. And partly because the mind is like a labyrinth. There's no end.
Mm.
There's no end. Like my first meditation retreat, I turned 21 there, and it was silent. So I celebrated turning 21 by winking at myself in a mirror. But I was like, holy shit, I'm crazy, because there were so many voices in my mind. And I would, like, I'd be starting by observing my upper lip, and then, 10, 15 minutes later be out on, like, I had gotten on this thought train, I'm far off in the distance, and then my little mind was like, how did we get here? And then I would try to go back. It's like
Mm.
there's no end. And
Yeah.
so the difference between emotions and thinking is that emotions are a organic system in our body, and all of the systems in our body are much more finite. Like, if you're going to exercise, you're going to sweat a certain amount. If you're
Mm.
going to sleep, you're going to sleep a certain amount. There will be a certain amount of excrement in either form. There you go. I'm saving you. Even liquid that comes out, right? Like none of our, I mean, you could even, like, maybe we try to eat too much, but you're going to get sick. And emotions, because they're body based, there's a certain degree of limit, and there is like a kind of pattern. There's a crescendo. If the emotion is allowed to be an emotion, and I'm going to talk about how we stop ourselves from feeling,
Hmm.
and one of the ways is thinking. But if an emotion was just allowed to do its thing, it would be like a wave where it would come up and maybe peak and then fade out, right?
Hmm.
And so much of what people are afraid of when it comes to starting to feel their feelings instead of think their feelings is that they'll be bogged down forever, that they'll never recover from their grief. And I'm kind of like, I double dog dare you to try to cry longer than 10 minutes if you're not in one of those acute moments. Like your body can't do it for most
Right.
people.
I was just gonna say, like, just like my brain is like asking myself, actually, yeah, what is the longest you think you could actually stay in an emotion or feeling? Because it seems like forever. I get that part. But now that you're saying that, it's like, I wonder how long I've actually ever stayed like sad or stayed angry. Like how like
Yeah.
consistently without
Right.
shifting and then going back to it, thanks to thoughts.
Right.
It coming back up. But yeah, like there's definitely that natural wave. And I think there's something very calming about hearing that and having that
Yeah.
reminder because we don't hear, this is the one thing that I found too in my therapy days where it's like sometimes I'm my therapy days for everybody listening. Sounded like a past tense thing. But where when you're going somewhere once a week, I felt like sort of like I wanted to stay angry because I wanted to talk about the anger that I
Yeah.
was feeling. And in that, I was sort of not acknowledging that I came in and out of anger within that week many
Right.
times,
Yeah.
or sadness or whatever it was. So that is just I wanted to point that out, just like such a great thing to remember.
Yeah, and people do get stuck in their feelings, but usually it's because they're kind of in their feelings and they're kind of resisting their feelings. Those are the feelings that last, is when you're in it halfway or you're trying to avoid it, or
Mm,
you're so like when people talk about being deeply depressed, and I'm not necessarily talking about like severe biochemical depression, although I bet that also would apply to that as well. But I think of depression more as like a layer of numbness on top of feelings, where because you aren't able to stay with the pain that you're in, whether it's grief or terror or rage or shame, because you can't stay with the actual acute feeling that you'll start to numb out. And so there's like a deadness that takes over. And so there's always like a low grade tint of the feeling, but you're never actually like the feelings that are actually acute and short lived are the ones that are given full expression. If you just look at the word emotion, motion, E, the word letter E, a lot of people like to say energy there. That works for me, but motion. So they mean to move. And so if we can learn, and this is what my entire wheelhouse is about, is teaching people the actual mechanics of bringing your awareness, which is a part of you that could either pay attention to thinking or feeling, bringing your awareness into your body for the purpose of connecting to, allowing, experiencing, and releasing emotion. And we can get into that a little bit here, but when you learn how to do that, and the feelings, your body starts, your mechanism starts kind of recovering to that of a child. Like think about being around an infant. They're having no trouble feeling. They feel, they cry, they wail, they recover quickly. Moments later, they're laughing. It's like infants before they start being conditioned, and there's a range. They're not all equally emotional, right? People aren't all equally sensitive. And also, babies start in a human for 9 months before they come out. And so there is conditioning there, but you will see babies, they emote and they recover quite quickly. You don't see babies that never cry or never feel, or that stay stuck in feelings. It's just the grownups who are trying to not feel that get stuck.
I love that. And you're naturally already guiding us down the road, because my next question was lead us through living with and being with intense feelings. So you've started there. Is there anything you'd want to add to?
Yeah. So if I would say there's like a few steps, and trying to break it into a linear process is a little bit misleading, because you're an organic being. This isn't going to happen in stages. It might not happen in this exact order, but in the effort of trying to teach something, the first thing to look at is that you're talking about your awareness. So that is the thing that listens, that has access to the sense doors, like hearing, smelling. You start bringing the part of you that pays attention into your body. You would get curious, awareness, and then curiosity of what's happening in your body, and specifically, ideally, under your chin. Between the chin and the crotch is usually where like most emotions occur. The torso, as it were. And you can start with a general curiosity of, how am I feeling? What is happening in my body? It's a really good time to turn off your phone, stash your phone, try to get to someplace quiet and safe where you don't feel like you'll be interrupted. And then start to track with your mind, what's happening in your chest. Like, how does your chest feel? How does your breath feel? How does your belly area feel? And so at first you might look for just like even muscular tension or tone or tightness. But as you get more subtle, you're really looking for an emotional tone. And now what do I mean? It might be heaviness, achiness, might be jitteriness or fiery, kind of like a more lively energy, a more frenetic energy. One thing that I could tell you that's not quite in the order I would normally teach it, but emotions have basically two energetic patterns. They either come up and out in an explosive way, or they collapse and pool, go down and in a collapsing or implosive way. And so, if you look at the 4 basic emotions, another way also to start to feel your feelings is to not, and this is someplace, by the way, I disagree with Brene Brown, which is part of why I want to like be more of a out there in the conversation. I love Brene's work, and I didn't actually watch the most recent documentary where I heard she's doing this, but there's a lot of focus in certain arenas. I think maybe the Yale Center on Emotions too, where they're really honing in on the language around emotions and saying that it really matters if you call an emotion this or that in this subtle way. And
Yes.
I think, to harken back to our theme, that's more thinking. And I think you want the fancy words to describe your emotions only when you're writing poetry or communicating. When you're trying to feel your emotion for the purpose of healing yourself, which is, I think, the best thing you could do with your emotions, you want to simplify it so that you can't check out, so that you can't pop back into your intellectual pain avoiding machine of your brain. And so those 4 emotions that I suggest, or actually it's 5 technically. We got mad, sad, scared, and ashamed. those are what I would call the 4 basics of like the wounded emotions. And then we'll add in happy or glad, because, you know, we have that too. That's also like essential. And it's kind of like those are the primary colors of emotion where you can't get any more basic. And it's really useful when you're trying to feel your feelings to use that very simple language, because the parts of us that are most shut down emotionally are very young. They're very simple. It's like, you know, it's our older, more resourced, more strategic, manipulative parts that are generally going to want to be really complex. And so as soon as you notice that simple tone of one of those emotions, let's say, then you might say to yourself, either internally or externally, I'm allowed to feel sad. Or like,
Mm.
of course I'm afraid. I'm about to go into $500,000 in debt on a house. Of course I'm afraid, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You give yourself permission. So we have awareness, curiosity, permission. So once you get some information from your torso, you give yourself permission and support. And so you might bring your hands to your body where you feel the intense sensation. I don't think I said that. One of the steps of tracking in the torso is see if you can physically locate the center of intensity of sensation. So is it more in your chest? Is your chest really tight? Is it more in your belly? And for people who are new to feeling, that's going to be quite complex, or it's not going to be obvious. So don't be mean to yourself if you can't feel where the cluster is most intense. But if you are being mean to yourself, use that as an invitation to try to feel how being mean to yourself makes your torso feel. That's another way. It's like if you're ever like stumped and upset that you can't feel your feelings, that's a feeling. And so you can always be like, okay. And if you start saying mean thoughts or mean things to yourself in that state, just try to be like, okay, how is this what I'm telling myself right now making me feel in my body? You can always just, instead of trying to, you know, be upset because there's a block, that is the way. The block is the way. Feel how you feel about the block, and there you are in your feelings. And then there's a few more advanced skills I could give, but I think it might be too much as far as I'll just briefly try to attend to them. I think and by the way, this is coming out soon. My next 2 workshops, just to do a shameless but effective plug, are getting into the gritty of this. So this coming Wednesday, 2 days after your podcast releases, I'm doing one on the emotional baseline and that basic energetic split that I was talking about of explosive and implosive. And then the last Wednesday in May, the 31st, I'm going to do the basic and advanced skills of feeling your feelings. So what I'm going to just very briefly speak to right now are the advanced skills, and they're very, very helpful. I think this is the difference between people who heal and who don't. And it's basically like there's a step of personifying the part of you that's having the feelings as a younger self. It often is a younger self, but kind of relating to it, creating a relationship to it as this younger part. And then there's a step called becoming, where you actually realize you are that part and you have to go into the pain and experience the pain as if it's true. And that's like really like one of the nuances is like people who have been in new age study or self-help study, we all learned that like, oh, it wasn't our fault as kids. We weren't at fault. We weren't bad. It was our parents, right? And so we kind of use that to spiritually bypass or intellectualize the pain. But the truth is the parts of us that have been carrying wounding our whole lives, they're positive that what they feel about us, that we're not enough, that we're bad, that we're too much, that we're stupid, that we're too sensitive, all those judgments, they're positive that it's true. And so if we don't give them their pity party and support them experiencing their pain as truths, they never really release it. And they're continually being shut down like they were as kids. So that's a step called becoming, and that takes a lot of practice. And then the last step would be, how do you come out of the feelings? And there's a process there about something I call reality testing, which is the place that thinking comes back. And we could talk about that if you're interested in it. And then self-care.
Lovely.
So yeah, awareness, curiosity, tracking, permission, allowing, supporting, releasing. That's where you're going to go into the releasing, and then recovering through reality testing and self-care.
Absolutely. Love it. And I do want to say because those of the people who may be coming directly from well, I guess it would actually be our last episode that we did together, but I have the feelings wheel in the book. And I think I even send people to Atlas of the Heart, if I'm correct, in the book. So I really like what you said there, though, because as you said that, I kind of was processing in the back of my, where was that really useful for me? That like sort of the new Brene Brown stuff and the feelings wheel and knowing all of that. And it is more essential to me as a communicator and a connector and my artistry, maybe,
Yeah.
and trying to understand with myself. But I love the reminder there of when it comes down to honoring and actually feeling your feelings, that simpler is better because and maybe you're about to go into this, but I can see how once I use the feelings wheel, if I keep down that path, it becomes about the why.
Yeah,
And I think
exactly.
like the biggest takeaway for me today is staying in the land of what and how when
Yeah.
you're honoring feelings.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that's like the biggest thing. And if the feelings wheel is not helping you with that, but sending you straight to why,
To your
then
mind,
be aware of that. Yeah,
to
to your
thinking.
mind.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because there's a story attached, obviously, when you think about ashamed, guilt, like, like those other ones that are kind of within mad or within anger, whichever one those fall into. So yeah, that's something that's very helpful for me to carry forward is, as is this really helping me feel what's
Yeah.
there to feel and process in that way versus mentally understanding what's gone on and
Right.
maybe why I'm feeling. And like you said, I love the color tones. We all had the big crayon pack and the little crayon pack. They
Hmm.
have their uses for sure, but when it
Yeah.
gets right down to it, do we need to go back and forth about what shade of blue that is, or can we just get into, that I picked blue?
Yeah.
Yeah, I that really resonates for me, and that's really helpful. And I just wanted to share that thinking out loud,
Yeah.
all those thoughts that I had
Well, they're beautiful. And I agree.
about that because I think I I I in my earlier days would hear like sort of what maybe sounded like conflicting and like start to check out. And for me now it's like this invitation to be like, oh yeah, that make like totally.
Right.
That is literally difference between feelings and thoughts in the way that when I go to process or honor them, how I deal with them.
Yeah.
That how and what versus the why is so thank you so much for that
You're
clarity around
welcome.
that. We
What
sort of been like tiptoeing around because I
can I
wonder
just say one
too.
thing to
Yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah, of
So I
course.
think the thing that helps us ask less why and need the story less, the reason I think we're so compulsively trying to, explain our feelings is because I don't think we're actually giving ourselves permission to feel however we feel. And one thing, that I talk a lot about is, people will say, oh, that's so irrational. It's not logical. Feelings aren't. No, it's emotional. They're different systems. Like your
Mhm.
emotions, they're not supposed to be true. In fact, they're not in here. I like to say, and there's a Radiohead quote that I'm obsessed with Radiohead, and there's a line in the song "They're There" that says, "Just because you feel it doesn't mean it's there. They're there." And I think it's
Mhm.
brilliant, and it's the antidote to my emotionally obsessed life because your feelings are no more true than your next poop is true. What they are is they're real. They're
Mm.
real, and you got to have them out. You got to feel them. You got to let them move if you want to be healthy. But it's not like there's an inherent truth. Sometimes truth comes when we have our feelings, like we'll have an insight. But I would always suggest to anyone not making any big life changes in the middle of a big emotional release. You want to let those parts of you have their pity parties, have their tantrums, feel the grief, the anger, the rage, the resentment they're carrying, let it all move, and then recover, reality test your way, think your way, resource your way back to the grown up before you decide what to do and what's true. And I think
Mm.
that the way that everyone can skip that, and if you notice you start pulling out the wheel or thinking and dissecting, and it's not in a moment where you're trying to make art or communicate, it's in a moment where you're trying to feel, the simplest way back would be like, can you just give yourself permission and just say to yourself, doesn't matter whether it makes
Mm.
sense that I feel this way. This is how I feel right now. I'm going to feel it through. You would
Mhm.
never try to fight with a shit, right? You would just be like, I'm sorry, you don't make
Unless you're
sense.
in public running down the street, which we got into in our last episode, then maybe,
Squeeze,
then just maybe.
squeeze.
No,
But
and
you wouldn't be
I think,
like,
yeah, the find the
I'm not
funny.
shitting.
Yeah, exactly. And the find the funny for me is starting to become like, checking in with that sensation in your body and you're going like, but is that like an agitated fiery or like and it's like, okay, then you're immediately getting out of just feeling the sensation and
Yeah.
acknowledging it, like, and bringing awareness to it as soon as you start to go, okay, is
Right.
that like a guilty fire or a
Right.
like,
And
you know?
sometimes like you might be somewhere in public where it's not the space to really have a huge emotional release. And so rationalizing it or just pep talking your way out of it or doing something that might be more on the kind of mindset or bypass is actually appropriate. The last thing I want to just say though is I do really think that like, in the feelings are amazing because they're just like part of our human experience, right? It's like part of the magic of being alive. It's so sad that we've gotten so narrow in our preferences around our feelings. And I think what the joy that's available when people start being willing to feel all the feelings is you get more of all of it, you know. And so I'm not saying that the only reason to have feelings or talk about them or name them is for the purpose of healing. But when it comes to healing, which I think is what a lot of people would be on this listening to this for, the only real, really best, or like maybe not the only, but the best use of feelings is as the mechanism to create emotional homeostasis and physical homeostasis. It's like to actually move and heal yourself versus just to like have all the fancy stories and the pretty poems. Do that separately. But if you're trying to heal yourself, you want the feeling to just be the thing that moves through you and clears you out and is finite and you feel better after.
Mhm. So I feel like we've been tiptoeing because like the last thing I was going to ask you is like lead us through working through intense thoughts and rumination. However, I feel, and maybe I'm wrong. Actually, I don't feel. I
Mm,
think that the answer might be to feel, to focus back in on everything you just walked us through. But I did want to give you a chance if there's anything you'd add around and specifically with grief and loss and not even death related loss, just new loss like breakups,
yeah. Oh, the worst.
ghosting, any of those like everyday situations, losing a job, not getting an opportunity, not a promotion. The rumination is
Yeah.
real,
Yeah.
and I've heard that again and again, and I know it's true for myself. Like, I think that would be my biggest struggle with thoughts is when it gets into that ruminating pattern. So I just want to give you, as we start to wind down here, like a few minutes on that.
Yeah.
In addition to, I can see the natural pathway to bring awareness to everything you just said and feel, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, there are a lot of people who have trained a lot in various um approaches where you can do things like question the truth or reality of thinking and find reasonable thinking, like all of the behavioral approaches, dialectical behavioral, which has a slightly more mindfulness body-based approach, but is also going to be assessing thoughts and whatnot. And I am not that person. I'm not that expert. And if anything, actually, I think I underutilize mindset and kind of the magic of mindset, like recognizing that, the kind of woo woo, like the secret,
Mhm.
intending your way through the magic of creating your life. I come in and out of that. And I think part of it is because I'm so focused, and the way my life has led me to be so focused on, well, how do you actually overcome core wounds? How do you go to the core of the core? I think the thought approaches that are trying to address the thoughts don't necessarily get to the core.
Mhm.
Whereas I do think as you heal the core, thoughts naturally emerge. Like, so if you can do the work to like pull in the parts of you that are holding your wounding, or like in the examples you're talking about, because you're talking about more of a daily example, like to support and be with and give love to the part of you that's hurting because you lost something you care for, person or job or whatever. That as you do that and you kind of allow that emotional mechanism to help it recover and bounce back to baseline, and in the daily way, feeling your feelings helps you bounce back to your emotional baseline. In the big way of trying to heal your core shit, your core wounds, it's like you're bouncing back over time from a deeply ingrained negative baseline of shame and fear and all the things that people get stuck in over their lifetimes of feeling like they're not enough, feeling afraid, feeling maybe sad or despair, not content, all of that. So like over time, if you have an emotional release practice, every time you take that little movement or you release your feelings, you're going to move your baseline toward a really robust neutral. And then when you're in that place where you're like, you feel pretty worthwhile, you feel more or less safe, you feel pretty content, then those like things that happen in life that will keep happening in life, like loss and grief and unexpected shit happen. You have the feelings and you would kind of dip into the pain and recover. So as far as what I think is useful to do with thoughts, like you said, maybe I'm just going to say feel. You can always ask yourself, especially if you're ruminating, okay, I've been telling myself this over and over, I can't stop. Like, what is this? How is this making me feel? I think the reason why that is the best option for you is because then you're going to get into a finite world. And like, you're going to be kind of tired if you can get yourself to cry. You'll be less likely to pick it up. Whereas if you don't feel what's underneath it, and I have a lot of tips in my wheelhouse around like things to use, like putting on music, getting in a bathtub, sitting with a tree, like things that will enhance your bandwidth. So you have the chance to dip into the pain underneath. Part of why we get stuck in our head, and why it's hard to feel our feelings once we want to, is that especially when they're old, big feelings, they get really big. It's like, we don't need to pull this into poop because you're going to get squeamish. But if you imagine you don't move something for a while, it gets harder and harder to move. And so we need a strong connection, which is ideally what's happening with therapy. Is like your therapist is a Wi-Fi hotspot for your bandwidth and capacity to connect to this big thing and download it onto or through your apparatus, right? So there are lots of ways to do that for yourself. So if you're in a spin cycle in your head and you can't feel, and so there's no relief, I would try to look at what helps me feel. Can I get in the bathtub? And a lot of people, what they do is they call friends, they call loved ones, and it's not bad, but it's like, if that's your only go-to, imagine how many people, that's like having in the bathroom with you. It's like, gets stinky and it's a burden. We're all kind of like dealing with our own shit. Everyone's pretty flooded. And so if one of your friends can only feel better if they dump on you, that can be heavy. And so I think it's good to know when you need support and to honor that and have those special relationships to reach out to, but also to have some tricks in your or some tools in your tool belt that you can try with yourself to see if you can get to the feelings. A few other tips that are not just having your feelings. I think writing the thoughts down can be really helpful. Journal writing, venting. And what I would say is, the teaching technique, or the thinking rather technique that I teach, of how to recover, something I call reality testing. Is, so you've just had a big emotional release session, or maybe you haven't, but you're going to try to reality test anyway. Like, it might be like, let's say in the middle of this episode, I got hit by a big wave of like, oh shit, I'm fucking up, I'm horrible. It's like, this isn't the time to go into that feeling. So you would need to, like, as quickly as possible, bounce back to just being present, right? Not ruminating. That would not make the thing better. And there are plenty of moments like that where you're trying to be present with your kid or your boss or whatever. And so it's not the time. And so reality testing is helpful. I would say in the simplest way, if you're really like mid-sentence, just trying to come back to presence. And the things that are always present are your breath and your sensations. Wiggle your toes, do a Kegel, feel your ass on a chair. Like, there you are. This is what's real, right? If you have a little more time and space, what I call reality testing is, it's the point where you're like, okay, I know you feel that, but is that true? Is that really true? And what I suggest for reality tested thoughts is that you go for the lowest possible, most mellow, most believable thought to the part of you that's hurting. So whether it's like the core wounded part that doesn't feel like you're enough, or the part that's like aching for your partner that you just lost. So like in a moment, like after a breakup, let's say, when you feel like, oh my God, I'm never going to love again. It's all my fault. I'm not lovable. A friend might say to you, oh my God, you're going to love again. And like, there's so many people, and, but like, that might not feel true, or like if we felt a lot of shame for being incredibly sensitive as children, it might be tempting to say, oh, my sensitivity was what made me amazing. But it's like, your sensitive part that feels shame is going to be like, you're fucking full of it. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm such a gutter mouth on your show.
Happened before, it will happen again.
Yeah. X-rated here. Or maybe like R
explicit, I think, is
R.
the podcasting world for that.
Right. E. So your part, like the wounded parts, the hurting parts, we don't want to sugarcoat them. It does nothing for them. And so that's part of how people can get stuck in a loop, is that you might be trying to fight yourself with feelings that are just not satisfying. There's no relief in them because they feel so not true. And so what might have been an example with what I just said about the childhood sensitivity is, what if it feels true to the wounded part of you and you say, what a shame that my parents didn't know how to support my sensitivity. I really was sensitive in a way that no one around me really knew how to do what to do with me, and how sad that I thought that that was my fault. So that kind of like is a real thought that might be believable to a wounded thought, is, or to a wounded part, like, and in with the loss breakup example, maybe it's like, I know right now it feels like I'm never going to love again. I felt this way before. It's the worst. I'm going to let myself feel this way because it's true in my body at the moment, but I know that there's a good chance this is going to change. But can you feel the difference between that and like, of course you're going to love again? So I just think, like, stop bullshitting ourselves a little bit, with our thinking. If you're looking for relief and you want to find, and maybe this is like a different way to say what like CBT would say is like a reasonable thought, but it's like, just take it down a notch. Don't try to like solve your thinking with like blown out affirmations, and really ask the most sensitive, most in pain part of you what feels true.
Lovely. Yeah, absolutely. I think too, just there's been so much there today, and what I'll also be taking away is just simply the awareness around, as things are coming up, like what is truly a thought and what is a feeling.
Yeah.
There's a lot of thoughts that I know I'm trying to pass off as feelings. I feel like a failure. I feel like I'll never blank again. I feel like this isn't like, that's definitely very much in my vocabulary. And I think it's such a great resilience experiment, just to like, if this episode is sending you into overthinking, because it might, because it's like,
Right.
whoa, that's so
And I
much,
talk fast.
going, yeah, we got it all. Just simplifying and going back to just recognizing, is that something I can check in with and actually feel? Then no, that's
Yeah.
a thought. And are you looking right now to process how you feel, or are you trying to think around how you feel? I think
Right.
that's, for me, that was when this concept first came to me. I've written an article on this before, but like that in itself was weeks and weeks and weeks of just going, that's not a feeling. Like, we can't sit with that, because that's a thought. We can sit with a
Right.
thought,
It's a
but that's not a
story.
feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a story. So thank you so much for guiding us through. Thank you for stopping by, and I appreciate it so much. I mean, I guess the question of the hour is, as we check out, what's one word for how you're feeling?
Relieved. Yeah.
Yes, I am. I'm feeling heard and connected.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess we're
Grateful.
we're just not going to follow the rules ever and use one word, but that's our flavor, and that's
Yeah.
that's fine because we make the rules here. Where can people find you, especially if they want to hop into those workshops that are coming up, because this is so of the moment?
Yeah. Thefeelingsmovement.com. It has everything about what the work I'm doing is. And the place where I'm putting out the most content is the Healing Feeling Shit Show on Instagram.
Amazing.
And there's no but you should know, like, episodes 5 and 6 of season 1 of my podcast, which is called The Healing Feeling Shit Show, goes into a lot of what I just talked about in more detail. And these 2
Amazing.
workshops coming up will be the most kind of refined version of that download. And yeah, and just one last, like, the one thing I want to say in closing is just to remember, like, those 4 words, or 5 words if you want to include happy, although you're probably not going to do this when you're happy. The 4 words of happy, mad, sad, and ashamed are kind of a saving grace for just being like, is this a feeling? If you make yourself choose one of those, it's very hard to be in your head. So that's really, like, just try it.
All right. I'm happy right now. I'll
Yeah,
say that.
me
I'll
too.
say
And thank
that.
you again for bringing me back to your audience. Love talking to you.
Thank you too. See you soon.
Bye.
What a great episode. I am so grateful that we got to have Rachel Kaplan back in the house to talk about thoughts versus feelings. To give us a little preview of next week, we're going to hop to Justin Michael Williams. He was generous enough to give his thoughts on thoughts versus feelings. And I think there's some really helpful hints in here to close out the show. So here's Justin.
The big thing that I'll share with people is, you're when we think we're describing an emotion, we're often describing a thought or a story. And the way that you're on the wrong track is when you say the words, I feel like. So if you say, I feel like he always does this. I feel like every time this happens, that's not an emotion, right? I feel should be followed by a word in the feeling wheel, which is like, I feel sad. I feel anxious. I feel stressed. I feel excited or uplifted. And so I have a lot to say about this, but I'll just end it with, the sentence says, I feel, and then it comes with the word like, you're on the wrong track. So that's when you want to go to the feeling wheel.
I
Okay.
love that. Yes, absolutely. And I feel like garbage and I feel like a failure are not feelings.
Are not feelings.
Just so everyone knows.
Yeah. I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm stupid. I feel like I'm ugly. I feel like I'm fat. Those are all thoughts. Those are all narratives. None of them are feelings. You might say, I feel ashamed. I feel whatever it is. Now we have something that we can work with versus the story that you're making up in your head.
I love it. Thank you. Well, Grief Club, that's the show. If you enjoyed it, please let us know by liking and leaving a review. This will help as many people who may need what we're talking about find it the fastest. Remember to honor the journey, and when that gets tough, find the funny.